Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Beastcoast Pokemon. Today, myself, Wolfe, James, and Rosemary are here to discuss the most recent regional championship. It is one of the most wild regionals I've seen in a long time, and that's because Articuno won the entire event. But before we get started, guys, how are you doing?
I'm hungry. I need to eat lunch.
Oh, dude.
Come on, Wolfe.
I know. I just lost track of the time. Anyway, that's how I'm doing.
I've already eaten lunch, so I guess I'm doing okay.
I just woke up from a nap and was almost late to this recording because I kept snoozing the alarm, but...
Okay, so like Reggie Gigas, we're all off to a slow start, but no worries, guys, no worries.
Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, the last time we made a video, my eyebrows look crazy. I told the viewers to trust the process, and I'd like to think that they've toned down a little bit. I'm actually very happy with how they turned out.
They look great.
So, you know, people normally tell you not to read the YouTube comments, but the Beastcoast channel has had like so many nice comments. I appreciate you all, guys. Keep gassing all of us up, not just me. Gas James, gas Wolfe, gas Rosemary, because everyone here is wonderful. But let's talk about the event a little bit. I mean, first of all, Articuno. We have to start off with that. Did anyone see Articuno really coming at all? Because I didn't.
I didn't think it would be for the event, but I knew a few Japanese players who were running into Global Challenge. So I knew that it was picking up a bit because of how ice coverage is really strong right now. I didn't expect it to show up at a regional this quickly. I felt like maybe there'd be some maybe EYC showcasing, but it ended up being a very fast transition.
I didn't see this coming at all. I feel like Articuno was always one of those Pokemon that you would look at and go, you know what? You could get away with getting a couple wins here or there with some Blizzard spam, but at the end of the day, it ended up being one of the most brought picks to this tournament, and it was even outside of the top 8 that we saw Articuno performing really well. So I'm super shocked that Articuno took off as much as it did, and sort of the after effects of having Articuno in this final meta.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that not that many people were honed in on, but that's what lent to its success, right? Like there were 2 within the top 8 and maybe a couple of others, but in terms of pure usage rates, it's not like everyone's like, oh, Articuno's the next big thing. It's more just some people are like, okay, I think it's really good into the meta right now. It was incredible to see it win. I mean, the team that won basically has no speed control either. There's no tailwind, there's no trick room, there's no icy wind. But it's really interesting because it essentially, one of the reasons why Articuno is so strong is because ice typing is just so good in the format. There's so many Pokemon that are in the top 15 in terms of usage rate that just don't take ice type attacks well. So you think about things like Rillaboom and Amoonguss, as well as Landorus and Tornadus, for example, as well as Raging Bolt. And then Freeze Dry is also really good into Water Urshifu, as well as Ogerpon and just water types in general. And so it's Articuno's offense is actually kind of bonkers. And then there's not that much weather in the format either, right? Manual weather from Sunny Day or Rain Dance on things like Tornadus and Whimsicott, I feel like isn't super common. Rain Dance Torn is a thing, but I feel like it's not used as much right now. And then in addition, Torkoal is just, I feel non-existent or just very, very uncommon. And so it makes sense because I think it allows for the Ninetales to thrive, and Ninetales is a big component to enabling Articuno, right? Because you just set up the snow, you make it so much bulkier. Having tried Articuno and having fought against it, even one single miss when the snow is set up against it is totally brutal, right? Because it's just such a bulky Pokemon, especially once you have Aurora Veil and Snow Up. And so you don't necessarily need to rely on misses, but it's a single fake out miss onto it, and you're just completely doomed because then your Rillaboom just gets hit by Blizzard, for example, right? But the moveset was crazy as well. It was a Blizzard, Ice Beam, Sheer Cold, and Freeze Dry. I can't remember the last time I've seen a mono type Pokemon and Ice Terror, right? I literally cannot remember the last time something like that won a tournament, but it makes so much sense because I think it's just by far the best moves, and you don't really need anything else because nothing truly resists ice. You just do decent damage even to things that resist it when you have Ice Terror and Specs.
I think one of the things that's really makes Articuno and just Snow in general very uniquely positioned is going back to your point about Torkoal. I feel like whenever you're actually bringing Torkoal, it feels so lackluster. You're there, you're slower than everything else. You could just get chunked before you're getting off a strong eruption. And it's really there to help enable things like Walking Wake or Raging Bolt, Flutter Mane. But I think those two just take a ton of damage now, and there's so many answers on every single team for those Pokemon in particular that it just feels like photosynthesis spam or sun spam isn't as powerful as I think what people would hope that they would be.
I think the team was extremely well constructed. You have, of course, Wellspring Ogerpon being one of the most common Pokemon in the format, and it can be a little bit difficult to get rid of Wellspring Ogerpon, but The fact that Freeze Dry is super effective against water type moves, making it 4 times effective against Wellspring Ogerpon, and still doing super effective damage even if it goes for the Terra, still does a lot of damage, especially even through the special defense boost. The fact that you take Ivy Cudgel extremely well, the fact that Blizzard can get around to follow me, so it has really strong construction. The Choice Band Arcanine is able to do a lot of damage to Incineroar, which is nice. Also has that Intimidate support, which when you stack with Snow and Aurora Veil makes it extremely hard to get rid of, like some of these Pokemon, like the Articuno with that Snow defense boost, having really high special defense too. I think it's base 125 special defense, which is already pretty difficult, but when you stack all those multipliers like Aurora Veil, like Snow, like Intimidate, it really adds up, while Articuno can really chip away a team. Then you have like something like an Assault Vest Raging Bolt, which is one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the format. And when you pair that with Aurora Veil, it's extremely obnoxious to get rid of. You have the Snarls, you have Intimidate. You have so many multipliers that are just stacking up where you're able to take damage pretty well and then just like chip away at your opponent pretty consistently.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I agree with everything that everybody said. I think a couple things that just like really stand out to me is just to really emphasize Aurora Veil. Like that move is incredibly broken. A Light Clay Aurora Veil means that for the next 8 turns, your team takes 66% or 33% reduced damage, right? On every attack forever. And I think that actually I was working on Articuno, like an Articuno video on my own channel, and something that I kind of noticed was that Articuno, in my opinion, scales really well with like kind of length on field, because the longer, like, let's say you get Aurora Veil up with your Articuno, you're probably going to need at least 4 or like 3 to 5 attacks to knock it out, right? Unless you have like a really strong, super effective move. And every turn Articuno's on the field, it has chances for Snow Cloak, which is, you know, like Aaron said, a single miss can have such huge implications. And it's most of the time clicking Blizzard. And like if both your Pokemon get hit with Blizzard, then you have a 19% chance for one of them to get frozen. And that chance scales really high, like more and more and more the longer Articuno's on the field. And in one of the stream matches of Articuno, I think, I'm sure you all saw it, it just sheer colded Registeel, and it just like dropped. And Registeel obviously would be a Pokemon who could counter it. But the thing is that if Articuno clicks 2 sheer colds, I believe the odds of it hitting 1 is like 51%. And so again, the longer it's on the field, the higher the odds are of one of these high variance kind of things happening, and they're just, the impact is so high. Like the reward for dodging a move or getting a freeze or hitting a sheer cold is insanely high, and there's not that much you can do to punish it. And actually something that Billa pointed out was in the stream games of the winner, there were no like Snow Cloak misses, there were no sheer cold hits, and there were no freezes. So I think the fact that this stuff is almost always a bonus, and of course sometimes you're going to be relying on it, like I'm sure that it happened during the tournament, but the fact that it clearly wasn't necessary to win the tournament, because like it didn't happen in any of the games that we were able to see, right? And so I think the fact that Articuno is so strong, and it also has all these like kind of like lower probability things that can happen that can just give you such a huge advantage, is like, in my opinion, super scary to play against.
I went to a local literally like a few hours after the tournament had ended, and in round 1 my opponent brought the Articuno team and I lost 0-2 against the person, and I was just like, at the time it was, you know, so hard to fight against, because I was like, I don't know what any of the EVs or spreads are, how bulky is Articuno, and I led like Urshifu plus Chien-Pao, and I was like, oh, I'll go for like close combat and Sacred Sword into it, and it did like 75% with the Snow up, and I was like, oh my goodness, like that is so bulky, and like then I just lost the game because then like Freeze Dry got a 1-hit knockout onto my Urshifu, water, and I was like, okay, bye-bye. Yeah, it's interesting. I think like now that the team is public, people will at least have a little bit more experience. Like, but going into that tournament, I guarantee you, like very few, if any, of the players who had fought against that had actually had a like real best of 3 experience against this comp. And it feels like something that maybe you fight on the ladder, but you're like, oh, what are the odds I'm going to run into it at a tournament? But now it's like it's won a tournament, right? So the odds of you actually playing against it in around either at a local or UIC or regionals or whatever, I think is actually a lot higher. And so, yeah, I think it's just such a cool team. And Hisuian Arcanine makes a return as well. Everyone's been talking about Incineroar returning, but despite Incineroar, I think, being the most used Pokemon at this tournament, there was actually only one in top 8, and then Hisuian Arcanine was the fire type let one. We also had Fire Ogerpon in 2nd and 4th place, Entei in 3rd place, Chi-Yu in 5th place, another Hisuian Arcanine in 6th place, Chi-Yu in 7th place. So every team had a fire type, but somehow Incineroar was actually the least represented out of those, which is crazy to think about.
Did you all see the turn? This is slightly unrelated, sorry, but I wanted to point it out. It's like Articuno and Aurora Veil against Fire Ogerpon and Urshifu, and it's in the finals, and the like Ninetales switches into Arcanine, gets an Intimidate down, and then -1 Ivy Cudgel plus Wicked Blow does like It does like 70% maybe to Articuno. Like it takes two of these strongest attackers in the game, including a critical hit, like, and yeah, like doesn't care at all. It's like, okay, like I guess I took some damage, and then Blizzard like does like 170 total percent of the health on the field. It's like, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's one bad performance for Incineroar, but I think that it's like a reminder that like it's not Incineroar is not like a Pokemon that will like automatically win you games, but I would be very surprised if it like represented a trend. Like I don't think that Hisuian Arcanine is going to even come close to challenging Incineroar's dominance, especially the longer the format goes on.
Yeah, and to that point, like they do completely different things, right? Like Choice Band Hisuian Arcanine is meant as like, hey, I can switch in and intimidate you and then threaten you with immense damage, like an Oko in the second turn, and Incineroar is
damage. Salamis isn't any good. Sorry,
get this guy out of here.
I'm sorry.
Incineroar actually, I think, is deceptively strong. Like people underestimate how much damage it does. Like Flare Blitz and knockoff, especially when they're super effective hits, are bonkers. You know, it's like Hisuian Arcanine comes in and I can like threaten so many one-hit knockouts immediately. Incineroar is more like a little bit for positioning, sometimes for damage if you're threatening a super effective hit. But I thought, yeah, the diversity in fire types were interesting. And I mean, we have to call out number 2 and number 3 at this tournament. Aurelien Soula finishing second. Almost finished the undefeated run, was 16-0 going into the finals, and was one game away from a perfect tournament, which is crazy.
I think it's really been impressive to watch the performance from Aurelien Soula, because I feel like he is a player that just spiked. Like getting into the Masters division, I want to say last season, this was a player that had immediately impressed. Every single tournament has always been a day 2, has always been a top cut, has always been a top 16. It's just consistency for this guy. And so I'm very excited to see what he's going to continue to be able to do, because every single tournament I see him at like top 8, top 16. I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like he's just going to be there.
Yeah, I think third place, I mean, Micheal Kelsch as well, right? Like one of the biggest superstars rising in VGC after starting playing last year, getting second at Worlds immediately in his first season, and then finishing third here. He's like very consistently number 1 on both the random bats ladder, which is initially what he was very well known for, as well as just like the best of 3 ladder. And like, you know, it's impressive because he just like publicly ladders on his account, doesn't really care about people knowing what he's using, and then just brings stuff to the tournament. Entei has kind of returned. I feel like it fell off for a little bit. It won the very first tournament of this regulation, but hasn't really seen that much usage. And he used a choice band set in particular. And so, yeah, it was interesting to see the return of like the choice band fire types in both Entei as well as Hisuian Arcanine. Aurelien's team, by the way, I think it's a team that was constructed by Snow, like one of the top Japanese players. That team just has a lot of offense. And yeah, I mean, it uses some of the best Pokemon in the format. I think right now, like Booster, Fluttermane, especially Speed Booster, is everywhere with that Icy Wind. We've seen sets with like both Icy Wind and Taunt as well. Landorus Therian is just one of the best Pokemon in the format for sure, and a lot of people have picked up on that. On Aurelien's team, he actually had Taunt over Substitute, which you often see, so that's another way to shut down both Trick Room teams as well as things like Amoonguss. And then the Raging Bolt was actually Electric Terra, which I think is pretty interesting.
You also have the secondary form of Speed Control with Electro Web, so not only is it going to be the Assault Vest set that we've seen this Raging Bolt start to tend towards, so it's really bulky, but it's also a way to help sort of decrease the speed on the field alongside the Icy Wind on the Fluttermane. And I really like that because I wonder what the damage calcs look like with the Electric Terra. Like how much damage is this thing actually doing? If you're going to Terra it, is the Thunderclap like a 2-hit onto something? I don't know what sort of bump it gets to the damage rolls with the Electric Terra.
Yeah, there's some pretty niche ones. I know that like some water Shifus can actually EV to survive a non-boosted Thunderclap. So
there you go.
You can just one-shot a water Shifu. I believe you can 2-shot some flutters with Thunderclap depending on the spread. I think if it's like really bulky flutter, you can survive too. But there are some implications. Also having spread Electroweb, just really strong pressure because you can't switch into really Electroweb because it's hitting both slots, able to provide speed control. So it's a really strong option, and it's a pretty good defensive option. Like the only thing that really you're worried about are ground types. So you're still keeping that ground weakness, but you also have Rillaboom and Landorus Incarnate that could just switch in for the ground moves instead. So still a really nice option defensively.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense, right? Because with the normally Raging Bolt, we're on Fairy Terra, which gives you resistances to like dark and fighting primarily, I think are the main ones. And like, is that it? Bug, I guess?
Immunity to Dragon, too.
Immunity to Dragon, that is very true. Yeah, but they're like, I guess, like there aren't that many fighting type moves beyond Urshifu, and like if you're willing to kind of sacrifice the weakness to like resistance to dark and not getting the immunity to Dragon, like you get an offensive Terra as well as a defensive one, because I feel like, at least in my experience, like most the Pokemon that most pressures Terra on Raging Bolt is often Fluttermane, and turning to Fairy like you're still neutral to fairy, right? But now you get a damage boost as well. You know what? Just like this is kind of a small thing, but the Electroweb Raging Bolt actually reminds me a lot of Cresselia back in the day, where it was this super tanky Pokemon with Icy Wind, where you could pair it with like a faster offensive Pokemon, and with Cresselia it was helping hand. With the Raging Bolt, it's more like Thunderclap, but you could either go for like damaging supporting option, like boost the damage somewhat, or protect partner, go for Icy Wind or Electroweb now, and then get some speed control. And so it's kind of interesting seeing that concept return in a way that like Cresselia is in the format, but it's not used very much. So it's just interesting kind of seeing the same type of role on a Pokemon used on a completely different Pokemon in a completely different format.
100%, yeah. I don't expect it to go anywhere anytime soon. The rest of the teams in the top 8 of this tournament, like I think for the most part were things that had already been performing well in the format. Like the team in 4th place is the team that Wolfe fought against in the finals of Charlotte Regionals. It's just really strong, right? It's like, once again, the concept of max speed, Ursaluna Blood Moon, and then you've got Farigiraf to set up Trick Room, as well as Tornadus for Tailwind, Clear Amulet, Iron Hands. And so I don't think that team is going anywhere. I don't think that many people are using it, but it's still really, really strong. Like Hands plus Farigiraf, it's so hard to deny Trick Room with that combination because you have Fake Out on your side. You don't have you block Fake Out from the opposing side with Farigiraf. So unless you have something that's like a Fluttermane with Taunt, then Farigiraf often will be able to just set up Trick Room, and then you can pressure with a lot of damage. But it was crazy to see the same Articuno team in 6th place at this event. They actually fought against each other in top 8, I believe. And then the return of 2-2-2 with the Chi-Yu, Fluttermane, Dragonite, Chien-Pao, Dondozo, Tatsugiri here in 7th place, which I have to say, I feel like we always talk about Dondozo, and it's finally returned a little bit.
Okay, so recently I saw a tweet with this sad-looking Chien-Pao face squeezing its head through a door frame in a door because people were like, well, what about me? Like, where have I gone? And so to see Chien-Pao back on a team with the 2-2-2 next to something like the Dragonite, I feel like we're seeing just flashbacks. I would love to know what all of your thoughts are, but it feels like Chien-Pao has been kind of just on the outside looking in despite having such a high usage in this tournament. It feels like it just hasn't seemed quite the same success as what we originally saw at the very beginning of Regulation D.
I think it's still really good. I've been using Chien-Pao, and kind of this bouncy team that was created by a Japanese player. It's really, really popular right now. Like if you actually look through like the 9th through 16th place teams, there's actually a lot of Chien-Pao, like 12th place, 13th place, 14th place, 16th place, 18th place, 20th place as well. And the 6 of those, that team is Rillaboom, Incineroar, Water Urshifu, Chien-Pao, Raging Bolt, and Landorus Incarnate. Eric Rios and Alex Gomez, who are 2 of the most prominent players in the world, and especially in Europe, replaced the Landorus on that team for Volcarona, but the rest of the team looks pretty similar. So a lot of people have been using like that kind of core. I think it's really, really good. But having used that team, I think fundamentally Chien-Pao at the end of the day is still just really frail, right? So you're vulnerable to something like Fake Out plus another move just knocking you out on turn 1. You're vulnerable to Incineroar switching in, getting an Intimidate, then Chien-Pao at -1 is just kind of sad as well. So yeah, I don't think this Pokemon's going anywhere. And if you told me it's going to win multiple other tournaments in this format, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, I think it is really good. But I have to say, like, it's interesting to see the return of Dondozo, but just in its true form, back in the 2-2-2 form. I always think it's interesting to look at how Dondozo specifically is changing. Like, what's the Terra people are using? What's the item people are using? What's the ability people are using? And now we're kind of going back to the basics with Grass Terra unaware. The main thing to note is this Dondozo was running Rocky Helmet, and the Tatsugiri was actually a Citrus Berry set rather than the Choice Scarf that you often see. And Fluttermane here is actually Specs rather than Booster Energy as well. So a couple little changes from what you normally expect. And then there was also Iron Head on Dragonite, which allows you to obviously have super effective damage onto Fairy types. And that's really valuable into Flutter, but also into things like Terra, into Fairy, like Raging Bolt.
I think it's so cool to see the usage of Dondozo, even just at the last couple of events. I'm just browsing through some of the stats. There were 0 Dondozo that made day 2 at the Charlotte Regional Championships. There was 2 at Knoxville, but even just the European event prior to Utrecht, I think it was Dortmund, 0. No Dondozo in day 2. And the only one that was at Utrecht was the one that made top 8. So I think it's crazy to me when you look at the stats that way.
I feel like it's kind of a balancing act. And I actually feel this way about both more Dozo than Chien-Pao, but I feel like some Pokemon are just strong or scary, right? And they might not be well positioned into the format, but if a Pokemon has some kind of inherent strength, then I think that oftentimes it's like you have a Pokemon and it's really strong, and then people learn to counter the Pokemon, and then the Pokemon feels weaker. So then people prepare less for the Pokemon, and then that creates an opportunity, right? And I feel like it's not a Pokemon that I'm personally interested in using because I think that it's like really volatile. You're kind of weak to crits. and like the hub, like it's just kind of like tricky to use, I think, and like especially 2-2-2 Dozo, just I think really it's really difficult to play that fluidly because you have these three distinct pairs, and getting stuck on the field kind of with that, like with the pairs not matching up, can be really dangerous. But like the worse Dondozo is overall, I think the higher the odds are that a Dondozo will have a good finish because people aren't prepared for it, right? And like especially I think Dondozo is a great example because you need to know what your tools are and what your plan is and like what Pokemon to bring and how to play, right? Chien-Pao I think benefits a little from this as well, where Chien-Pao is just such a strong Pokemon where like I feel like Chien-Pao Dragonite wasn't around for like a month or two there, and I was like, then I like all of a sudden on the ladder I started playing against Chien-Pao Dragonite. I lost like every time, and I was like, wait, like how do I beat this again? Like I forgot, like I wasn't thinking about it, and so I think that it's kind of like the more people count out these Pokemon, the more potential there is for at least one of them to go deep.
Yeah, these players are persistent. Like it's like armor size spam. They come back no matter what.
What's interesting also is, to me, this is one of the most unique tournaments I've seen from Europe in a really long time, and there are some crazy Pokemon and picks. I mean, obviously, Articuno and Ninetales winning in itself is already so cool to see, but if you go through even just 9th to 16th, I mean, 9th place, there's a team with Okidogi as well as Iron Boulder and Grimmsnarl. It's Choice Band Iron Boulder, by the way, with Rock Terra, Assault Vest Water Terra Okidogi, and then Dual Screens Grimmsnarl. Such a cool team. I'm really sad we actually did not get the chance to really see that a little bit more, and it just bubbled out. And then you also had a Alolan Ninetales here in 11th place with Life Orb, Ice Terra Alolan Ninetales with Blizzard, Freeze Dry, Dazzling Gleam, and Protect. And Alolan Ninetales' special attack stat is not actually that good, but I think the idea is, hey, like Freeze Dry is super good into threatening Ogerpon. Blizzard super good in just dealing consistent damage across the board, and Gleam is really good into Dark Urshifu. And Dark Urshifu plus Water Ogerpon is kind of everywhere right now, so I think that's fascinating. This team also, by the way, actually had Whimsicott. I keep saying, like, where's Whimsicott? Where's Whimsicott? Well, here it is, and it's a set with Covert Cloak with Light Screen, Encore, Tailwind, and Moonblast. There was also an Assault Vest Archaludon on this team with Flash Cannon, Breaking Swipe, Body Press, and Snarl. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought that team was fascinating as well. There was also another Alolan Ninetales here in 14th place. I was just like, where did this Pokemon come from, and how is it on so many different team compositions, right? Like 4 in the top 16, 25% of teams. That team, by the way, had an Assault Vest, a leftovers Hisuian Gudra with Heavy Slam, Body Press, Shelter, and Life Dew, and then a Citrus Berry Annihilate with Bulk Up as well. So just a lot of unique picks that I did not anticipate coming out of this tournament. Like Dusclops at 17th place. You had Sylveon, we were talking about Rose.
There's
Sylveon.
two.
Yeah,
I saw that.
Sylveon went 10 and 4. Sylveon with Baxcalibur.
And Boz. There's literally 2 Sylveon in day 2. I can't believe it. I was looking at this and someone actually added me. They're like, hey, Sylveon made day 2. And then I go in and look at the teams. I'm like, actually 2 Sylveon made day 2.
I told you, because there's potential. Don't.
I am rejoicing. Sylveon enjoyers rejoice, because this is truly the best of timelines here. And both of these Sylveon were super interesting. Like, you got Throat Spray as the held item, and also Terra Water. I want to say these are 2, like, basically the same team. But you have Quick Attack, Hyper Voice, Misty Terrain, and then also Protect or Detect. It's just really cool to see that set start to rise, because the last time we saw Sylveon get used and find success was when Tomoya Ogawa actually won the Senior World Championships with this Pokemon, and it was a Terrafire Choice Spec set, and it was very cool to see how it has evolved since then, because a couple weeks ago, Sylveon's not working. I'm so sorry. I love this Pokemon probably more than most people. It's not happening. But Sylveon is happening right now, so very happy.
I think it's just funny how we talked about the 2 Pokemon from the last episode we did, which was Sylveon doing well, and then Iron Boulder was like a do not use, and then Oliver's like, I'll hold my beer real quick, and then almost made it to the top 8. So I think it's just really funny how the coincidences worked out. I would have really liked to see how well Baz could have done too. Unfortunately, he did have to drop because he was not feeling well that day. So it could have been actually like a top 8 potential. Possibly. But I think it's just really cool to see a lot of these different sets, especially as we're getting towards more of I think the end game of Regulation F.
Totally, yeah. And then, of course, then there were a lot of more standard team compositions. I actually noticed a ton of Farigiraf here in day 2 as well, which isn't shocking, but feels like Farigiraf was dropping off for a little bit, and now it's returning once again. You had some more like niche picks like Porygon 2, as well as Registeel. Gouging Fire is still in the field as well. 35th, by the way, in 35th place, Mark using a really interesting team featuring Hisuian Lilligant and the Galarian Articuno. So somehow both regular Articuno and Galarian Articuno had good runs in this tournament. And if you told me that, I would have not bet money on that at all. So that's really cool to see. But overall, yeah. And then I think the last Pokemon that really caught my eye coming out from this tournament is Volcarona, because both Eric Rios and Alex Gomez picked up on it. And when top players like them use a Pokemon that's not very represented in the format, I think it always kind of draws some attention. And so they specifically used a set with Protect, Quiver Dance, Heat Wave, Terra Blast, and it's Fairy Terra with Citrus Berry. So part of the idea is that when you have double Fake Out pressure with Rillaboom and Incineroar, you can just keep cycling Fake Out, Quiver Dance, Protect, switch out, Fake Out, Quiver Dance again. Fairy Terra just makes you really strong into Dark Urshifu. With Flame Body and Citrus Berry, you're able to kind of be a nuisance, especially to like Water Urshifu, because you can just Terra, they'll Searching Strikes you, pretty good chance to get burnt. And then even though Citrus is like a one-time recovery, Rillaboom's Grassy Terrain is just so valuable as well. So I tried it out. I actually I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I know they've been like really sold on it. And so I think it has a lot of potential, but it just takes a lot of time to get going. You need multiple boosts, in my opinion. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but I think it's a really fascinating pick right now.
This reminds me of the team that Michael Zhang brought to the Portland Regional Championships. I'm really sad we didn't get a chance to see more of it. And Michael was cooking a little bit harder than I think what Eric and Alex were, but he ended up bringing an Eviolite Magmar with Flame Body. And so both Magmar and Electabuzz were two Pokemon that people were really interested in because they actually ended up getting Follow Me in this generation. So it feels like a very similar type of idea, just having the opportunity to activate the Flame Body just as a way to help out with an Urshifu or something like that. And I do think that Rapid Strike Urshifu in particular in this tournament rose a ton. Like it wasn't even in the top 12 when we were taking a look at Dortmund just a couple of weeks ago. And now all of a sudden it's back holding hands with Single Strike Urshifu at the top of the usage charts.
I think Flame Body's a really good ability. Like having used Magmar a fair bit, I think that just especially with terrestrialization where you can actually not be weak to water type moves, and yeah, like having redirection or in Volcarona's case, kind of forcing your opponent to target it or else risk running away with the game. It's kind of like Snowcloak in that you never want to bank on it, but when you get it, it can just be such high impact, especially with Urshifu in the format, like you said, because Urshifu, there's typically no downside to Urshifu attacking because you can't protect obviously, but actually having a cost or a risk to them attacking, and because them getting burnt is just massive. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really, really, really good ability, and I'm not shocked to see Volcarona do well with it.
Yeah, Flame Body and Rocky Helmet are with how we've seen Choice Scarf, Rapid Striker, Shifu, it's been a very popular core, as we mentioned, Aaron said about the really common one of Lando Eye, Raging Bolt, the double Fake Out. I know that UB Slow used it in the last season of Battle Stadium. Might have hit rank 1 with it or something similar. But overall, the ability, I think, to kind of deter, because Scarf, Rapid Striker, Shifu has to choose between usually going for the Surgery Strikes immediately or going for U-turn. And being able to deter it with either a Rocky Helmet on a potential switch, like Rocky Helmet and Amoonguss, we've seen quite often throughout the generation, just to deter Urshifu from clicking Surging Strikes, as it can go for it. It's a really strong option, but you do risk potential Amoonguss or Tornado switching in, Rocky Helmet taking 51%. And then the same option with Flame Body, but because Choice Scarf Urshifu can't protect, you're pretty much locking into either Surging Strikes and having to risk it, or again, you turning out, or maybe even hard switching just because you don't want to risk the Flame Body. So it's really an interesting choice, and it's good into this common, I think, standard of Fire, Water, Grass, just because you have the Flame Body scaring the Urshifu. You have the Terra Blast, Terra Fairy, especially against Raging Bolt, that you can actually hit now. So it's a pretty unique option. I'm not sure how strong it is. I haven't played it, but overall it does sound pretty unique in theory.
One of the things I want to move towards is the usage stats from this tournament. I actually did not look at them before this, and oh my goodness. So,
they're crazy.
Incineroar, the difference between day 1 and day 2 is actually fascinating to look at. Day 1, Flutter Mane, 55% usage rate. On day 2, it actually fell down. So it was the most used Pokemon in day 1, but on day 2, it fell down to the 6th most used at only 40.8%, which is still pretty high. But Raging Bolt, 29.2% on day 1, 51% on day 2. we've already been talking about Raging Bolt a lot. It's not really shocking. There's a lot of good ways you can run this Pokemon right now, whether it be Calm Mind or Assault Vest or Booster Energy. But that's a huge jump. I think that's fascinating. And then Farigiraf ends up making a big jump into day 2 as well, while not being in the day 1 stats. Tornadus actually has a huge fall where it's on 27% of teams on day 1, but only 10% on teams on day 2. So how do you guys interpret those stats? And then also Water Urshifu being right next to Dark Urshifu once again, like Rose said earlier.
I think the stats are weird personally. Like, I don't even know how to read into them. Like, I mean, you pointed out a lot of the big ones, but the number 1 most used Pokemon in the format generally falling to the 6th most used in day 2, like, I mean, that's shocking on its own, right? Like, that's actually, I think, the thing that stands out the most to me. Although Raging Bolt going like up over 20% in usage between day 1 and day 2 is indicative probably of the fact that it is a very, very good Pokemon. Yeah, I mean, the usage stats are just weird, honestly. I'd be really curious to see if this was like a kind of like a tournament where everybody was going a little off the wall, or if this is indicative of something more. The only thing that really, like, I guess, like, the only thing that I think might be a trend, that's not really true either. I just don't really know how to interpret these because they're so different than what we've seen so far. One thing that does stand out to me is Landorus Eye. Like, I feel like Landorus has been kind of like not a tier 1 Pokemon, but maybe like a tier 2 or tier 3 Pokemon throughout most of the format. But now it's starting to look like it might actually be like one of the best. Yeah, I'm curious to see kind of like if this tournament, because this tournament reflects that with super high Landorus Incarnate usage, and I'm curious to see if like that's a trend going forward, or if that like was if Utrecht was kind of just like a strange tournament across the board when it comes to the stats.
I've been following usage stats for every single region for quite a while now, and one of the trends that I've noticed in Europe in particular is that the meta is quite centralized. If you take a look at the top 12 Pokemon for even day number 2, look at the fall off between Chien-Pao at 34.7% and then Farigiraf at 14.3%. Everything else that's in the top 9 of those Pokemon is somewhere between 34 and 57%. And I think what's really unique about that is that like Europe has always sort of had that as its sort of status quo, is that they really like using good Pokemon. Sometimes you see a couple of weird things thrown in there, like you're still going to see your handful of Sylveons or like the Regieleki or the Registeel or something like that. But for the most part, if you look at all of the teams that are in the day 2, they all have like 4 of the same Pokemon across the board. And I think that that's going to be something that maintains a trend for Europe. But we have a regional that's going to be in Brazil next. And that's where I feel like we start to see a huge diversity in terms of where the meta is going. And that could be something that really shifts heading into Vancouver, just to see if this is something that maintains course.
This tournament, I probably will say it's an anomaly. And there's one usage stat I'm going to bring up that
Let's hear it, James.
Think, no cheating. How many Amoongusses were there in day 2?
1.
It was 3.
Oh.
Now, how many Ninetales were there in the day 2?
At least 4.
I was going to say 5.
Top 16. I don't know if there were more outside of that.
It was 4 Ninetales. So Ninetales outplaced Amoonguss in usage stats.
That's insane. That's
Crazy.
actually insane.
And I think the worst Ninetales player went 10-4, and the best Amoonguss players, there were 2 of them, also 10-4. I don't know what to say. Like, the fact that Ninetales outplaces Amoonguss and literally out more usage stat wise, it was more common at this tournament in day 2 than Amoonguss. I think it's an absolute like shocker.
Not only that, but remember how much Golden Go has been around? There were 2 in day 2. That's it.
Wow.
What?
More Ninetales than Golden Go.
James, that stat is actually still mind-blowing. I also just can't, like, it's one thing for Ninetales to just have been in this tournament, but it's another thing for 4 to have made the top 16 and for it to have won, right? Like, I actually think that's a pretty dang big deal, and I would say going into this format, I don't think a lot of people even had Ninetales on their radar, but I think now you actually have to really respect both defensive potential of Aurora Veil and Light Clay, as well as the offense that it provides into a lot of the format. And so it's not something I would have ever prepared for going into this format, but I think when all of these Ninetales teams do so well, it really says something about the potential of the Pokemon. But also, yeah, where's Amoonguss, James? What's your take on that? Why is it not here?
You know, out of any region, I would have expected Amoonguss to be like most common in Europe.
Yeah, same.
Yes.
So that's why I think this is an anomaly. I cannot understand really at the moment where Amoonguss went. I mean, I know Wellspring and like just Ogerpon in general was like very high usage. A lot of teams usually had 1, but not see like basically any Amoonguss. It's just, I don't know what happened.
He went on vacation. He's been working hard.
Amoonguss put himself asleep.
He flew over to Brazil and Canada for the next upcoming regionals. That's my prediction. We'll see a lot more Amoonguss at those tournaments. But if not, then I think we're gonna have to question Amoonguss's boss and be like, hey man, he's been missing. Where's he at right now? Because he needs to put those numbers in.
Might be Amoonguss's winter right now. Maybe hibernating.
Before we wrap up, there were just some other Pokemon just outside of day 2 that I thought were really cool. I wanted to call out. Like there's a Bronzong in 51st place. Bronzong's really interesting because you are just completely immune to Landorus Incarnate with Levitate, and this had actually had Skill Swap as well. Skill Swap Levitate with Bronzong and Cresselia has been something I've seen a little bit more recently. I don't expect to be super meta or anything, but just wanted to call that out. Rock Ogerpon here at 56th place. That's often seen on these hard Trick Room teams, and that was a hard Trick Room team. Hisuian Zoroark at 58th place, which I think is really cool. I always was like, this Pokemon should see a little bit more play. No one just knows how to use it. This was a Choice Scarf set, by the way, with Bitter Malice, Stellar Terra, Hyper Beam, Icy Wind, and Trick. You can just see Wolfe's face just go like with
he doesn't even have Hyper Voice or Shadow Ball. Like, aren't those the moves? Wait,
I guess not.
Malice, the ghost type move.
You also had Primarina here at 60th place. That's something that people have been using a little bit more, like because especially the Calm Mindset, like you kind of just sit on the field, Calm Mind a couple times. Hyper Voice does a lot of damage. Corviknight, Excadrill, Tyranitar, and Garchomp here.
Lentar.
The Lens special.
Oh, actually, sorry. It's Lycanroc. Yeah, it was Lycanroc, but it's Excadrill here on Victory Road. I think the actual Pokemon was Lycanroc, so very much inspired by Len's team, which finished 9th at Knoxville Regionals. Yeah, those are like the main Pokemon I wanted to call out. But yeah, every time I look at these tournaments, I'm just like, what are the unique picks and what are people using? There actually was an Excadrill actually here for a little bit further down at 78th place at 6-3 as well. And so I gotta give props to the Europeans in this tournament. They were cooking. And there was another Ninetales here at 90th place, Clefable, Clefairy. So even though we're in a meta right now where of course there are like some Pokemon are really common, it still feels like really wide open. And even among the top teams, it feels like there's like 10-ish compositions that all have a lot of potential. But it's really cool to see the rise of new things just pop out of nowhere, like Articuno.
I'm actually really curious as like the final talking point. Where is the meta going to go from here? Anticipating more snow, where do you all feel like the meta could head to? I immediately think of more manual weather. I feel like you have to have some sort of option to potentially be able to shut off the weather before the Aurora Veil can go up. But what are you guys thinking?
It really just depends because you don't want to just have like a weather move without maybe the team kind of benefiting it. Otherwise, because like for instance, a Pokemon like Torn has so many moves you want to run, right? There was a Sunny Day Torn in the top 8, which is able to capitalize off like Chi-Yu and Fluttermane. If you switch out your Fluttermane, lost a booster energy, you can get it back with Sunny Day. So I think in those cases, we also saw, I think the Edu and Toller team also run Rain Dance on the Torn, so you could power up the Ogerpon, but also reduce the damage that Gold could take from fire type moves. So in those cases, I think it makes a lot of sense. But like otherwise, manual weather is a bit tricky, I think, because unless your team really benefits it, like it just ends up being a lot worse in certain matchups. So it's always like that risk reward factor. Do you exactly want to make that trade off? I also think Sand is actually pretty underrated. I think Tyranitar is actually a really good mod for what it is right now. It's able to switch into like, obviously it's really good into the Articuno and the Ninetales that's roaming around right now, but I think it's been pretty strong actually, other than like handling darker Shifu or Shifus in general. Like I think Tyranitar actually has like really good stats and options, being able to break Sash on darker Shifus, being able to put on a lot of pressure in general with its coverage. I think it's not a bad option. I wouldn't be surprised to see like Tyranitar rise back up if we're talking about weather.
I think that this is a format where like we don't really have one dominant team. Like there's a ton of different archetypes that are viable. So I think the inclusion of snow as like another viable archetype probably will have some slight implications. Like I think we'll see maybe a little bit more rain and a little bit more sun teams, which have both established themselves as viable, but like not a top pick, but maybe like a B or a C tier pick, and maybe somebody will innovate. I know Marco Fierro had a really successful run with a sun team recently, so maybe we'll see like more teams like that. One Pokemon I think is actually underrated right now that it happens to have a good matchup against the snow team is actually Iron Crown Psyspam, because I mean, at least if Utrecht is to believe, there's less Incineroar doing well at the top level. And Iron Crown, I had to look this up, but Tachyon Cutter, its signature move, it actually has perfect accuracy, as in like it doesn't miss ever, even in Snowcloak. It has like over 100%. So If Incineroar usage is like going down, and I don't know, like other fire type Pokemon like Entei and our Hisuian Arcanine are picking up, and snow is more of a thing as well. I think that like Iron Crown is very scary, and like I think it can always like be threatening, and yeah, having a format where like more compositions have trouble with it, I think is an opportunity. Because I think it hasn't been like fully figured out yet either.
It's always funny to follow the trends, right? It's like Crown, it felt like it had a nice, everyone's talking about it going to the Charlotte Regional Championships, and then no one's been talking about it since. Dondozo got second at the first regionals of this format, then people stopped talking about it as well. But then like it always kind of comes in waves, and so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Crown make a resurgence at some point. But yeah, I think that's all we've got today. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks as always to Beastcoast for hosting us and for allowing us to make such fun content. And so if you enjoy, let us know what you like down in the comment section below. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And yeah, we'll be back with more content very soon. So see you all.